In 1956, President Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act, launching the interstate highway system. The public argument was national defense, move troops and evacuate cities in a nuclear attack. But the deeper logic was economic. Whoever controls the infrastructure controls the future. The highway didn't just move people, they moved power, reshaping where Americans lived, worked, and built wealth for the next 70 years. Today, a similar infrastructure debate is playing out. Only this time, it's not asphalt and overpasses. It's data centers, power grids, venture capital pipelines, and legislative frameworks. And the question is the same one Eisenhower faced. Who sets the rules, who pays for the build, and who benefits? Welcome to Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gordon, the national security podcast that gives you a competitive advantage, an elemental understanding of the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. I'm Eric, joined each week by the Honorable Sue Gordon, and together we'll break down the headlines shaping our world, looking for patterns and early warning signs, and asking how we should be thinking and acting as citizens and leaders across issues in intelligence, technology, and business. It's March 30th, 2026. Let's get to it. Hey, Sue, how are you?
I want to say despondent over my Devils, both the women and men, losing out. But I am wearing my Duke t-shirt because you always got to rep. And the other thing I think we're going to talk later in this segment about what's mostly been on my mind is what's going on in Iran. So I'm, as always, happy and as always, not totally satisfied.
Yeah, that was a bit of a bummer. Busted up both of my brackets there. I had the Duke women going a little further, and the men is certainly my national champion. As a sports fan, it was a great game to watch. When I don't have a dog in the fight or a horse in the race, I always cheer for the team that's losing or the underdog. And as heartbreaking as that was for Duke, commendable for Early and the Yukon Huskies for staying with it despite being down 19 in the second half.
Yeah, so can I respond to that? One, for my Duke women, what a great season. And listen, they ran into in UCLA an older, by that I mean more experienced, taller team. And Duke was awesome in the first half, but with halftime, UCLA figured out, oh, we know who we are. And they just proved it. And so have never been more proud of my Devils. They avenged a couple losses. They stayed together. They played such a team. There is something special about this team. And I'm going to say judgy of Coach Lawson throughout her journey, just in terms of what are you doing? Oh my gosh, I know what she's doing now. Who she is, what she's built, the culture she's building, and just her growth as a head coach, remembering that she hadn't been one before. I'm super bullish on Duke women and so very proud of them. And I've said before, I have a bunch of my former teammates and people that we're connected to by years who played for Duke. What fun it's been as this set of 20 old gals who just love the sport, love the school, love the team, to just be together and watch this all. So that was awesome. On the men's side, if you love the game, that was the game, right? Bravo, UConn. Man, there are so many times, and it is so easy when you're down by a lot to just be like, oh, I guess it's not our day, or I guess they're just better, and just let your energy flag. And holy smokes, they just kept that up. So props to UConn, even though it kind of hurts to say that. And was it 27 years ago on that day that the Boozer's dad was part of one of the great losses, denying Elton Brand a national championship? But John Shire, I love you. I am so impressed that you've taken over Krzyzewski's team and program with such aplomb, delivered such outcomes. But man, get an inbounds play and do something as you're bleeding out on the court, not just to hope that the time moves faster. So, Coach Shire, you're awesome. Duke, you're my fave. I believe in you. But so many still learning and growing to do.
Yep. Still more good basketball to be had, but a bummer that we're busted. What are we talking about today?
I think we've been setting up this episode with some of the talk of the worldwide threat assessment and national AI framework. So we're going to continue. Today, we're going to talk about infrastructure, as you alluded to, and how do you actually make that real, not just policy statements. So we're going to talk about the White House releasing its national AI legislative framework, what it says and what it doesn't. We're going to talk about another part of the AI infrastructure, which is energy and the administration's proposal with a bunch of the big private providers, the Ratepayer Protection Plan, where those companies have committed to paying for the power plants. And then fun for me is we're going to talk about In-Q-Tel, because I know a little bit about that. And I know a little bit about the ODNI and the CIA. So, the ODNI came out and said it was their intention to move not In-Q-Tel because it's a private company, but leadership of and the interface of from the CIA over to the ODNI. So we'll talk a little bit about how I see that. And then I think what we're probably going to start with is what's been on my mind is talk about Iran, because I think there's certainly the things that happen there are going to tie to anything else this nation decides to do and spend money on in the foreseeable future. So that's what we're doing today.
All right, let's jump into it. We'll start with Iran, a continuing and evolving story. As we go to publication, things will have inevitably changed. But Sue, what are some of your thoughts now that we're entering about a month of talking about this?
Yeah, I really try and stay away from being too hyperbolic or breathless about stuff, but I'm going to appropriate this analogy that I don't even know where I heard it, which is it feels like we're on the Titanic and like, oh, look, there's an iceberg. And we're just continuing to steam toward it. Let's talk a little bit about there are some signals that tell me we're getting boxed in, and the reason I see them that way. The first is there really isn't an agreement. I am sure, I am 100% sure there are lots of conversations, lots of emissaries, lots of folks talking about things, talking to their interlocutors, things being floated, things being said. But as far as is there an agreement on the table over which we are actually negotiating, I think the chances are two, and Slim just walked out the door. The other thing is, if you take the two things that were supposedly proffered, both from the United States and Iran, that falls into the classic situation is that when two sides are really far apart, neither one can agree to any sort of truce or
Hmm.
cease settlement. Because the person who perceives that they're winning, why would they accept less if they think they're winning? And the person that thinks they're losing, why would I accept that? Would just hasten my demise. So any sort of talk that we are really on the path to an agreement, I think is just almost fanciful. Then we're left in, how do we get out of this? There were two questions when we started. One was, what are we doing? And the second one is, what's the plan? And I will never understand, except in terms of vagaries of personality, why this wasn't a conversation that could be held with the American people. If you really believed and you really expected the economic impact that we're feeling, it would have been great to go, oh, I don't know, maybe if you had a State of the Union address like 2 weeks before to say, here's why this is so important to us. It may involve this. Here's how we're mitigating, but it is important enough. To my everlasting disbelief, except personality type, I will not understand why we didn't in this case. And the second reason why, to me, that was a mistake was now how it's unfolded, it is clear that the only thing that we can do, other than walk away, leaving the world and the United States worse than it was, is regime change. Unfortunately, that might have been the single most important objective at the beginning, right? You've got a maligned state. Even if the sitting leader is going to pass away soon, they would have enough time to succession plan. What's the likelihood that they're going to agree to anything meaningful to do things differently? And so that was at the outset one of the things you had to have in mind. It didn't seem like we planned for. You've actually made that less likely to happen now, right? Because if you
Yeah.
walk away and declare some kind of success, Eric, What's the likelihood that this regime, because it is still the same regime, even if you've killed a lot of people, even if I don't know whether the current Khamenei is really still functioning, it's 47 years of people who dogmatically believe in this. They're gonna open the Strait of Hormuz, and now you've angered them, and now you've decimated them. You may have destabilized it. You have certainly thrown away some of the opportunity you have with a population that was clearly ready for some sort of change. So, here are the reasons why I think we're boxed in, besides the fact that what could have been the big objective that should have been prepared for much more seriously that clearly wasn't, that now is probably your only out, and yet is less likely than it's ever been. I think the other thing I'll just say is that Iran still has a lot of cards to play. We have completely devastated and damaged them. There are capabilities they had, they no longer do, but they are a very patient adversary and threat. They've already survived our shock and awe, and I'm not sure that they don't now believe that they can wait it out. They can and are in the process of wrecking the global economy, and they know it. Especially if the Houthis, now that they've joined in, decide that they're gonna take away the Red Sea.
Mhm.
That's 20% plus 12% of the world's oil, and not just oil, I'm talking about just shipping and infrastructure and fertilizers and chemicals and things that everyone and chips and helium and so many things that we rely on. That's a lot, and they certainly know it. And Iran can also pressure their Gulf neighbors. Whether people should have expected it or not, we clearly were not we, the collective, were clearly not prepared for that. And so now, while every day Iran has less and less capability, they probably still have enough to do some damage, particularly if they're getting help from the Russians, who we just gave a financial boost to. So I think Iran has a lot of cards. We probably should watch the ground game there, but can we just talk a little bit of realism? The geography, my NGA colleagues are so proud of me here. If we just talk geography, Hormuz is really mountainous and really cliffy and really hard to take without your adversary having advantage over you. And just from a number perspective, I think you'll know better than me. First Gulf War, 5 to 700,000 troops. Second Gulf War in Iraq, less than that, but still hundreds of thousands. And what are we talking about? 10,000? Listen, I love Marines and Special Forces too. So I think we're boxed in. And then I haven't even talked about, let's say you magically come some way out that feels pretty good. Where are the institutions that are going to do the backbreaking labor of all the connections that you have to make? And again, even though it's fun and games right now to try and throw some blame at NATO and our allies for not joining us, at some point, any agreement you have is going to require a coalition. Have you made that more likely that you have the people who can build that coalition, no matter how many hats Marco Rubio can wear? There are a lot of things about this moment that are not only about the instantaneousness of it, or whether our institutions are still intact, or whether we have so diminished the capability and we are so far out of our skis that easy outcomes are harder and harder to come by.
Yeah, I'm struggling to see an off ramp. It's seeming more and more likely to me that we're going to have boots on the ground to achieve those intended outcomes. But again, what are those desired outcomes? And there is a precedent from this administration of saying things are going to be a bumpy ride. Hey, I'm going to impose all these tariffs. It's going to suck for a little bit, but this is in our better interest long term. And we didn't hear anything about that here. And I think it comes back to a point you made previously, coming off of Venezuela and some of the overconfidence of we just crush this spec ops mission across all elements of government, the military, the intelligence services, everybody pulling that off. And then we went into this thinking we could do something similar, probably getting hyped up by Bibi and the Israelis.
Yep.
So I'd love for them to come out and tell us, what is our plan here? What did we get told? How did we get sold on this? Because now we're in it. And where's the off ramp?
Now, Israel really does need regime change, because it really is the regime that puts them under massive risk. And to leave now, They are really holding a bag, even if we can find a way. The other thing I might say is I'm really big on and exhausting. I hear this from our listeners all the time. Sue, I've called my congressman. It hasn't helped. Keep doing it and choose new ones. But listen, this isn't about war powers. Who cares? Like that's you and I have not talked a lot about the War Powers Act because I think it's sketchy legislation in general, and we're so OB on that. But I do remind Congress that they do have budget authority. They could actually write language that said you may spend no appropriated funds. We're going to talk later about how clever they're being on reprogramming. No
Hmm.
appropriated funds on anything except withdrawal. So again, there are levers still in place to try and shape this, but the fact that we have no conversation about it, the fact that we've gotten ourselves to the problem, well, the president's brilliant and he gets to say whatever he wants, and unfortunately he also believes it, is kind of where we are. And even he, I think, is going to have a hard time extracting himself, keeping all his conditions in place. I can't look weak. I must look strong. I can't ruin the economy. I haven't planned for regime change because I promised I wasn't going to have a forever war. I just don't know how you bundle up any of those things, cobble into some sort of, yeah, I already won. Even though it is also true that we have left, no matter what we do now, we have left Iran far less capable and more unstable than it has been in a long time.
Yep. We'll keep watching it
Yep,
and probably have an update next week.
probably.
Well, on March 20th, the White House released its National Policy Framework for Artificial Intelligence. These are legislative recommendations, essentially a blueprint for Congress. This is the latest step in a policy arc that started with the AI Action Plan back in July of 2025, moved through the December 2025 EO on ensuring a national policy framework for AI, and now arrives as specific legislative guidance across 7 priority areas. Those are child protection, that AI platforms must implement safeguards against exploitation and self-harm. Parents get tools for privacy and screen time, age assurance requirements. There's communities and infrastructure, promote AI-driven growth while preventing electricity cost increases from data centers. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. And also strengthening enforcement against AI-enabled fraud. There's intellectual property, ideas of deepfakes. Let courts resolve whether fair use covers AI training on copyrighted materials rather than legislating it. There's free speech, protect First Amendment rights in AI content moderation, avoid vague content standards. There's innovation, light touch regulatory approach, removes regulations that hinder AI development. There's workforce development, preparing American workers for AI-driven economic shifts. And finally, point 7, state preemption. Federal standards should override state AI laws and create a unified national approach. So we talked about this idea of preemption before, but now that we've seen some more details, what jumps out to you? Is this the right framework for governing a technology that's consequential, or is it designed more to protect an industry than to govern it?
Great questions and super good summary of something that you and I, in general, we've been on the side of huzzas for this administration to keep addressing things like AI and cyber. What I'll say about the new framework is that it's politically smart, it is operationally thin, and it is heading us straight into a federalism fight. It isn't a rule book. It is legislative recommendation to a Congress that is, well, inept. So I love the focus. I really do love the focus. My question is, as always, how exactly are those things going to happen? We have a weakened federal infrastructure that was not doing enough anyway, and there's no mention. There is some of national security, which turns out to be the best community that we've always had to drive effect and to demonstrate risk trades that we need to make. So those are a couple things. So I thought I'd introduce a new segment: the good, the bad, the ugly, and the undefined.
He's the good, the bad, the ugly, and the undefined. That gray in the middle where I spend my time. Not a hero, not the villain in your mind. Just riding that line. The good, the bad, the ugly, and the undefined.
So I think the good on this is that it's grounded in public anxieties. This is not a nerdy policy framework. It's talking about things that people are really worried about: free speech and innovation and jobs and workforce development and community infrastructure and child protection. A lot of the things about the recent court ruling against, was it Meta and Google, was all the bad parts of things. And this is trying to address some of those public anxieties. It also links policy to enabling substrate. So it's not just policy, but it says, yeah, we got to focus on energy and data centers and chips and export control. So I think that's a good piece of this. I think from a political perspective, I think that's good. I think the bad is it's not self-executing. It's heavy on principles and light on governance mechanics. And as I said before, especially with a weakened federal infrastructure, what's the connective tissue here? And there are some cognitive dissonance between who's going to have to do the work, communities, and who's going to be controlled, communities. And so those things I think are different. It's also light on frontier risk governance, although it does suggest that this is an area where national security needs to play in. I think the ugly part of this is the through line of preemption, and that is minimally burdensome national standard that simultaneously wants to stop 50 discordant state regimes. And it sets up a hard collision with states that are already doing their own thing for their communities and actually have moved along on this path. I also, point of personal privilege, have to say that states can govern women's bodies differently, but not technology. So let's just say that this administration is so confused on whether it is for states' rights or whether it is not. And I think that's what I mean by this is a federalism collision coming, because this is exceptionally explicit on that front. And then I think the second ugly part is the data center backlash. You get faster permitting, but you're trying to have no pass-through costs to consumers. And so I love all these companies finally realizing that they have national security responsibility. I don't think we've seen a ton of demonstration that when it comes to action or spending their money, they're willing to take that on with no pass-through, whether that's to consumers or to shareholders. So that's really interesting. There are some undefined things in there. What counts as an undue burden on innovation? Who's in charge? How much will be done by Congress versus agencies? And again, when I talk about intellectual dishonesty, are we for Chevron, the Supreme Court decision? Or are we anti-Chevron? What is it that Congress or agencies that are going to get to decide what we do? What happens on copyrights and deep fakes? Who does the silence on those fronts benefit? Is it perhaps the companies that now don't have to pay for that in order to be able to use it? Will Congress actually move, and on what timeline? So I think there are some undefined things here. So that's my good, bad, ugly, and undefined. Anything you want to add?
Nice. Now, on the one hand, I think it's helpful to have this conversation,
Yeah.
and putting out all
Good.
7 of those points are really good things we need to talk about. The administration's not burying their head in their sand, and they're publishing and addressing and continue to put this stuff out. But I agree, it does lack some of the specifics, and maybe that'll come out later as they work with the legislative bodies. But I think this almost, maybe this is too rosy of a look on it, almost sets us up to have, the conversation we lacked going into Iran. Maybe this is kind of the opposite of that. It's the conversation that we can then say, hey, in November, Representative X, what is your thought? Or what are you going to do to protect the children on AI? What are you going to do to make sure Texas is represented if something conflicts with the national framework?
Love that. Great point. Agree with you. And I think you and I are all over this because we love the conversation. And I'm going to say it's a great demonstration of the way our system is supposed to work, where the people who come into power through an election are carrying policy. And they're supposed to articulate that policy. And then the system takes it on and say, oh, how are we going to do that? So I'm always judgy of policymakers and policy. But this is a case where I think this administration on this front is doing the pieces it's supposed to do in order for us to have these fights out. What I'm worried about is, do we have the infrastructure to not take the easy way to either let companies have their way or to constrain states? But great point. I do think you and I talk about wanting this all the time. And I think in this domain, this administration has delivered on that front.
We do need to talk about how we're going to pay for it. And the energy and electricity rates are front and center of that debate. On March 4th, the White House hosted a signing ceremony where Amazon, Google, Meta, Microsoft, OpenAI, Oracle, and xAI signed the Ratepayer Pledge, a voluntary commitment that the rapid expansion of AI data centers will not raise electricity costs for American families. What the companies committed to, that they would build, bring, or buy the new generation resources and electricity needed for their data centers, paying full cost, cover all power delivery infrastructure upgrades required for their facilities, where possible, add surplus capacity that serves the broader public, negotiate separate rate structures with utilities, and coordinate with grid operators to make backup generation available. I believe that affordability will be a central issue in this upcoming midterms and will cascade only to forever wars. Rising power bills were already becoming central to that conversation, and President Trump, who campaigned on cutting costs, needed to show he could deliver AI growth without punishing ratepayers. But critics argue that voluntary pledges are insufficient without enforceable regulation, and that the energy math doesn't add up without nuclear, gas, or other baseload generation and diversification that we've talked about before. So, Sue, a voluntary pledge from tech companies is one thing, enforcement is another. Do you see this as meaningful commitment or political theater?
I think just following on the last one, I think this is politically powerful. And I don't just mean in the creepy sense. There is, probably because Understandable Insights does such a good job of talking about these things. I think people are beginning to understand that just top line assertions of something we're going to build actually has a pass through cost to them. And so asking more questions about this. So I think this is a politically powerful statement. I do think it's technically fragile. And I think what over time we need to look at is how we distinguish the intent from what you and I loosely call physics. Oh, you wanted it to work. And so if AI is national security infrastructure, then its energy costs, this is what it says, right? If you want to read through it, it says if AI is national security, national infrastructure, and I threw the word security in there, then its energy costs should be treated like infrastructure, transparently financed and not quietly shifted onto households. So brilliant.
Sounds like a magical place.
It sounds like a magical place. Here's what it implies. The people who develop the data centers, direct developer payment. They have to pay. It also implies that you're going to have some dedicated generation and development of new power plants because the infrastructure we have barely keeps up with the load that we have now, notwithstanding any weather event that we experience every other day. So it does imply dedicated generation. It implies federal and state subsidies because a data center is not a self-sustaining thing. You do have to get power to it and from it on an already strained grid. Are they also responsible for upgrades to the grid? So you're implying federal state subsidies. And you're also, it kind of implies special tariffs, and that is if you're a hyper user, if you're AI, you pay a higher rate for capacity guarantees because any capacity that isn't guaranteed, who does it go to first? And how do you ensure that happens? And so even if the data centers pay directly, even if the developers pay, there's competition for that capacity. Who pays for transmission upgrades? And who ensures that we have reliability reserves in crisis? And again, you and I love talking about national security crises, actions from adversaries or competitors who would diminish our ability to act and increase theirs. But we both know that it's not electromagnetic pulse events or cyber activities that cause most of our problems with our power. It's weather. And that will be true when the whole world runs on AI. So who's going to guarantee those reliability reserves? So the commitment is the right goal, but we're going to have to be disciplined. Electric grids don't care about slogans. They care about load. The top line intention, I think it is a very sound communication to the American people in a lexicon that makes it obvious why this is important to them. I love all that. Man, there's a lot there to be worked out. When I was at the CIA as director of support, we recognized this and we set up, because no one ever paid for infrastructure of the new capability they introduced, and they just expected the system to produce it. We set up working capital funds that were not appropriated dollars. But doing that is really hard, and people really argue about it because it's still additional money that has to be spent in order to ensure that you have the infrastructure that keeps up with the capability. And so, good thing to take on, but hard thing to affect. especially in a distributed republic like the United States is.
Yeah, I think everyone could open their local newspaper or their local community impact channel, and you'll find some controversy about a data center being proposed or being built within 50 to 100 miles of you. It's affecting all of us throughout the country. Yeah, I think the government needs to be involved in promoting this and advocating, because we are in a race with China and we do need data in order to run our AI. But I think these businesses should have to go into the local area and say, here's what I'm going to be doing. It should be almost on the state and local level of, hey, I'm Meta. I want to build this data center in your backyard. Here's how I'm going to improve the infrastructure and through the tenets of capitalism, make it in your best interest. And here are the guarantees I'm going to do. Here's the investment in the infrastructure. And if we need to pay a little bit more on our electricity bills, here's the trade-offs we're going to get from that.
It is going to come down to communities. There will be incredible pressure to pass costs on to the base. The AI companies may be the big consumers of a lot of this load, but law of large numbers, right? If they can distribute rate increases across the 350 million Americans that actually buy their power, they're going to clever to do this. So what you've suggested is, what should people watch for as this unfolds? Look what's happening to your utility rate cases. In what situations are rates changing? Have those companies that want to come to your locality that say they want to build this business, this new data center, what are their special rates? If you're a big user, how is that big use accounted for with additional costs? Not just saying, once I build something, that big use is going to fall to the infrastructure if something goes wrong. And look for dedicated generation deals. It's not just, are you building the center? It's, are you building the new power capacity to power that center?
Yep. That was my saved round, was diversification.
Yeah.
I would like to see more of an emphasis on energy generation diversification, whether it's solar, wind,
Right.
nuclear, coal, all the different elements or ways that we can get that power, because we will be challenged by those environmental events, not just the demand events.
Exactly.
All right. Well, let's talk about In-Q-Tel now and the intelligence technology pipeline. So Politico reported this week that DNI Gabbard is seeking to bring In-Q-Tel, the CIA-backed venture capital firm that has been the intelligence community's primary technology bridge to Silicon Valley for over 2 decades, under the management of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. As a reminder, In-Q-Tel was created in 1999 to help the CIA keep pace with commercial technology innovation, invest in startups and emerging tech companies whose products have intelligence applications. It's been remarkably successful. Early investments in companies like Palantir and Keyhole, which became Google Earth, and dozens of cybersecurity firms. So the model's strength has always been speed and direct mission connection. The CIA identifies a technology gap, In-Q-Tel finds a company working on it, and the investment bridges the gap faster than traditional government procurement. So the argument for the move: supporters argue In-Q-Tel caters too much to the CIA's tech needs over other agencies, the NRO, NSA, FBI, DIA, and others that also have need for cutting-edge technology. Placing In-Q-Tel under ODNI would reflect its role as a community-wide asset, not a CIA subsidiary, and it would give the DNI more visibility and coordination over how emerging tech is deployed. The argument against it: moving oversight could introduce bureaucratic layers and slow decision-making. The CIA's connection to In-Q-Tel is built on speed and direct mission focus, a model that's worked for 25 plus years, so if it ain't broke. And there's a pattern concern. Is this about better governance or about centralizing authority under a DNI who has shown interest in expanding her office's control? Much like last week, Sue, you are uniquely qualified to comment on this story, having founded In-Q-Tel in 1999, and you've worked on both sides of this, at the CIA and at the ODNI. In-Q-Tel's speed comes from its proximity to a mission agency. Does moving it under the ODNI, an oversight and coordination body, inevitably slow it down, or is there a way to broaden its mandate without killing what makes it work?
Your top line of what In-Q-Tel was perfect. Actually, I was asked to figure out how we were going to do something about the fact that we needed access to all the amazing stuff that was going on in then Silicon Valley, but in general, the innovation ecosystem that is the United States of America, and to do it differently than one-on-one contracts that are governed by just an agency, but rather turn it over to essentially a bunch of venture capitalists to say, given these needs, what are the most exciting things that are available? Now, at 27 years old, you said it exactly. It's been incredibly successful at doing that. A couple things that I don't know, people just don't know. It's like if you wanna learn the true story of the formation of In-Q-Tel, our friend Eric German wrote a great article for Fortune magazine.
Fortune sound right? Eric German?
Yeah, it's a really good story about what the intent and how it was formed. A couple things that the supporters forget. The big question is, and it's the one I always ask, what problem is trying to be solved here? Seriously, where the interface office is the reason why we don't have the innovation we need still in the intelligence community or the larger national security community. Moving the interface center is somehow going to magically make that gap between capability existence and mission use gonna close. What are you trying to do? Where do you think the problem is? And the supporters and the tacit implication, I think, misses a couple things that are just true. Number one, I consider one of my failures when In-Q-Tel was established, because I was so concerned that the idea of it was going to be killed in its crib by the forces of the status quo, that I really wanted to get it out of my hands quickly and into the hands of the founders in the private sector of this thing. And so I did not align it with a mission organization, but rather created this thing called an interface center. I really believe that the only remaining thing that it doesn't do particularly well is it still doesn't close that gap between capability existence and use. It has done amazing things with capability existence. We still struggle with getting that into use. And so having, even within the CIA, the interface center being more administrative than it is mission focused is one of the ways that gap exists. It's too easy to take someone's money to solve half the problem without accounting for, as we said in the last segment, what are all the other things that need to happen. So I'm not sure that moving where the administrative function is addresses what I would say is still a remaining challenge for the whole national security community is, yeah, we spend billions of dollars on new capability, but we're not seeing the mission outcome effects as well as we must. So that's just one. I don't see how this solves that. Two, it has been many, 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 many years called the day Sue wrote her first piece of paper since the CIA was the only one who had access to In-Q-Tel. That was a design decision I made back in 98 because I didn't want to have to fight the interagency process to get it going. But ever since then, yes, the CIA spends its appropriated dollars on it, and it does. Many of its problems are wildly and widely applicable. Almost all those agencies' missions spend their own dollars. They do some coordination, but if you bring dollars, the institution and the mechanism is certainly big enough for you to be able to put your dollars against your challenges and have In-Q-Tel, the machine, now affect them. I don't think moving administration away from a mission organization to the ODNI when all the other agencies can already set their own priorities and appropriate their own funds for this use. Again, what problem is that solving except potentially moving it away? And then I think the last thing is we've talked about what Director Gabbard's stated intention is for the ODNI in order to make it smaller and have it do what only it can do. It is somehow this, I don't know how much money is appropriated to it right now, but let's say it's $100 million. Is this $100 million getting it better organized going to solve the problems I just said? And if you want to take on from the ODNI, what should In-Q-Tel be doing, considering it as a community asset at that level, then I think you have to ask questions whether the model as it exists is still as complete as it needs to be. Should it be much more aggressive about being involved in what data are available for the intelligence community? Should it be much more involved in what standards for use of new capabilities are? In other words, assign yourself the challenge of continuing to think of how it can have the impact it was designed to have and ostensibly has had, but make that impact more modernly useful. So even if you want to do something at the ODNI level to make it even more effective than it was imagined to be or has grown to be, I don't think taking the interface center solves any of those problems. So I don't get it. And even if you were saying just wants to burnish your image and demonstrate that you have more control. I don't think this is the kind of control the ODNI is going to get a lot of huzzas over affecting. So that's how I see it.
Maybe it's an acqui-hire, and they want to bring those people in to innovate at the agency-wide.
Okay, great. I love that, Eric. I love that you always challenge me when I'm proving that I have deep state elements, and that is my own conventional biases. Well, it's not the administrative people, and all the technical people don't actually belong to the government. In-Q-Tel is its own 501c3. The only control the CIA or any entity in the IC has over it is the contract it writes with it. So you could issue a different challenge. You could appropriate funds for a different work program for In-Q-Tel to affect. And you have some ability to influence that because we specifically chose the absolutely amazing board of trustees because they did have a tethering to national security and they would not be rogue. So there are lots of ways to engage the company. None of it is bringing the talent inside of any organization. Listen, I love the quest of always refreshing how a 27-year-old model can be made better. I just don't hear in this move any of the articulation of those kinds of things. But if you did and you went to Congress and Congress decided they wanted to support it, then make that case. But this, I don't know. It feels like what the American people, and actually you and I as former government employees, it feels like it's government making additive government institutional changes as though the bureaucracy is going to solve it, rather than saying, hey, I think it actually needs to be changed. This move, to be clear, what is one of my favorite sayings? I'll get it wrong, which is change costs. If you make it bigger, it costs. If you make it smaller, it costs. If you make it different, it costs. You are going to spend actual money, actual resources to make this move. Why? And since this administration has made that one of its flagship slogans, this feels particularly disingenuous to me.
All right.
So let it be written, so let it be done.
What do you want folks to walk away from this episode remembering and not misunderstand?
I think some of the same things that we've talked about before is that a statement isn't in effect. That AI moving from vision to legislation, I think is a good thing, but we got a lot of intermediate steps there. Infrastructure decisions are policy decisions. I love that this administration, with both the payment for energy and the policy itself, is saying that we're going to do a better job of making sure that consumers aren't affected. Boy, there are a lot of gaps in how it's going to happen and who's going to make sure that happens. In other words, great vision, this lack of governance continues to vex me. And then with the In-Q-Tel piece, generally for everyone to pay attention that structural changes in institutions usually reflect power dynamics. And trying to understand those power dynamics are really the way to understand whether the structural change is for good or for less than.
Nice. What else are you watching?
So I'm watching an announcement last week that used to be, we built a whole episode around it, and so maybe will in the future, is the government has just awarded a $185 billion contract to Palantir and Anduril as primes, but a bunch of others for the purpose of building out what we have talked about as Golden Dome, which is this notion of a shield over the United States, and I'm going to presume ultimately, and our interests, that would protect us from incoming missiles. So this is a tangible step. $185 billion is real money. I think interesting signal in Anduril and Palantir being the ones that are the primes on the contract. They're two of the cool kids club that are very well aligned with this administration. They also are both really into data, and I think there's a lot of that's a data sensing communications problem. So
Yep.
that's cool. But just real quickly, presage maybe to a future episode. I'm going to go back to my good, bad, ugly, and undefined. The good is the strategic logic is real. It attempts a modern architecture and investment in space-based sensing of incoming threats that might end up being the most valuable piece. The bad is the program definition is immature. The real cost estimates are much higher. So far, there's limited transparency to Congress. Large defense architectures are historically expanded scope and cost as the physics, another use of our favorite term today, and operational realities become clear. In a way, if you're old like me, you remember SDI in the Reagan era and Brilliant Pebbles, very similar idea of protecting
Mhm.
us from space. And ultimately, it's just so expensive, so hard to actually do it in a meaningful way. So watch that one. The ugly is that major defense initiatives always raise governance concerns, especially when programs are specifically tied to one administration, and then time just makes it cross over those things. There are real deliverables that they propose in the 2027-8 timeframe. Man, at best, those would be demonstrations, and at worst, this is more like a 35 or 40 kind of implementation. And the undefined is, what problem is this actually meant to solve? Rogue missile launches, hypersonic weapons, pure nuclear arsenals. How survivable is the space layer at a time of ASAT? What doctrine governs the system? Is it going to be AI decision making? So I think, to me, the biggest thing to watch here, or the biggest thing I want our listeners to understand, is good offense always beats good defense. That defense is so much more expensive, and it only takes one on offense. And offense always can innovate slightly faster in a non-systemic fashion than systemic defense. If you want a corollary, the world spends trillions of dollars on cybersecurity. Is cyber attack still a problem for us? And so there is this big reality of spending time and money announcing to the world that we are going to have this defensive system. Just remember, good offense always beats good defense. Aren't we counting on that in Iran? So that's one. Man, that was a lot of detail for what I'm watching. I'm also watching the TSA executive order. Ugh. I mean, yay, let's pay TSA people. I mean, I've been not paid. It's exhausting. The human cost on those individuals, in addition to anyone who's trying to travel. I got to say, if you could have done this, why didn't you do this? I will also say, Congress, what are you doing? And so one of the things I'm watching about it is, how does it play out? Because once again, you can probably squint at this and say the president has the authority to reprogram already appropriated dollars to the Department of Homeland Security to this purpose. But again, this is another area where the action is outstripping the legitimacy and suggesting that our institutions are just not keeping up to the demands on them. And again, our systems are the plumbing of national power. Nobody really notices until they stop working, and we need to notice. Man, I'm chatty today. I will also say the hacking of the FBI director. I've been harping on cyber so much that it has much more mischief potential than we're seeing or have seen. And this Iranian hackers targeting the FBI director's personal email, it is not intel collection. It is psychological messaging,
Yep.
and it's designed at humiliation. And because it's so hard to attribute, that ambiguity allows signaling without full escalation. So as Aunt Sue says, y'all, you're either target or transportation for cyber actors. Clean up your act. I have a rule. I don't have a picture taken with a drink in my hand, because that would undermine me if you were to see, oh, look at her. So y'all, target or transportation, clean up your act, what you're saving of yourself and what you're doing.
See, that's why you're such a consummate professional, because I don't take a picture unless I have a drink in my hand.
Okay, Eric, stop doing stuff like that. Again, this is why I get all these cards and letters which says Eric's our favorite. Seriously, you're killing me, Smalls. You're killing me. What are you watching?
So for me, I'm watching Anthropic. The federal judge in California temporarily blocked the Pentagon from declaring them a supply chain risk. So the judge put a ruling on hold for a week. It's going to allow the Justice Department to appeal and is requiring the government to provide a report by April 6th on how it plans to comply with the order. So more to play out in the next couple of weeks, but going back to the disagreement between Anthropic and the Pentagon. And then the other thing I'm watching is this Cuba blockade. So reports are that the U.S. is going to allow a Russian tanker full of crude oil to reach Cuba. It's estimated 730,000 barrels of oil that's owned by the Russian government. So we talked before, Cuba's been having daily blackouts, severe gas shortages, soaring prices, and deteriorating medical care, according to the New York Times. The blockade's attracted a lot of international criticism from the United Nations. The U.S. is causing a humanitarian crisis, is what folks are saying. But I'm curious to see how this plays out, if we're going to let more in. And I don't think anyone benefits from oil being more than $115 a barrel than Mr. Vladimir Putin. 730,000 barrels at $115 a barrel is $83.9 million on this one ship to the Russian government. That's interesting.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, and incongruous. So
Yeah, so why are we letting that boat through? What's special about this one other than it's a Russian ship? How are things in Cuba? I know we intend for regime change there.
in our first episode this year, we talked about what you could infer about the president's strategy being about scarcity, leverage, and power. And then I was thinking about how you look at actions in terms of what they reveal about power dynamics. And then when we were talking about the worldwide threat assessment, we talked about looking at this subtle shift in the assessment itself, not the way it was talked about, the assessment itself, of moving to a more economic-based, businessy perspective of transactions rather than strategic outcomes. And so maybe if you look at that choice and the two choices you mentioned, those are really just further reflection of that shift. And again, we've been pretty clear on our opinion about what that means in terms of second and third order effect and what world you're leaving behind that. But those are probably pretty good lenses to look at what you've just raised. Good job. Bravo, Zulu.
Thanks. Well, that's what we're watching and how we see it. Thank you for joining us. No doubt there's more to come. This country's strength isn't in its power, industry, or government, but in its people.
So thanks for joining us. We hope we made this incredibly disrupted world more understandable. We'd love to hear what you think of our direction, focus, and insights. It's a conversation with you that we want, and we want to serve you well. So join us next week and each week for the Understandable Insights podcast, wherever you listen. And as always, go forth, do good, and for goodness sake, be kind to one another. It makes all the difference in the world.
Boots on the table, cards in a fan, 10-star sheriff shaking my hand. Preacher's got whiskey on his breath tonight. Says, son, you ain't wrong, you just ain't right. Dust on the Bible, dust on my gun. Can't tell a sinner from a chosen one. Every wanted poster looks like my face. Guess I'm guilty of falling from grace. The good, the bad, the ugly, and the undefined. That gray in the middle where I spend my time. Not a hero, not the villain in your bad, the ugly, and the undefined.